Welcome, curious minds, to the deep dive. Grab your notes and settle in because today we are plunging into a conflict of truly, well, biblical proportions. We're talking about a war fought not just with armies and siege weapons, but one waged against the very stability of consciousness, of memory, and of magic itself. Our mission today is a pretty rigorous one. We've taken a monumental stack of source materials that detail the final, agonizing chapter of this universe-shattering struggle. We are going to be zeroing in on the ingenious, almost impossible strategic plans that had to be deployed against the machinations of the Imperial Order. And not just that, but also the systemic collapse of magic across the world and the desperate acts of self-sacrifice that were required just to survive.
It's so crucial to understand that this was a multi-front war. It wasn't just one thing. The final battle, when you really break it down, was less about military might and much more about who could unravel the deepest secrets of ancient magic and prophecy first. The stakes were absolute. They were centered on the fundamental rules governing the world of life, the devastating reality of corrupted magic, and, the existential threat of forgetting your own identity, your own purpose.
Okay, so let's unpack this. To give you the clearest path through all this complexity, we've structured our deep dive around three central threads. First, we're going to examine the existential, unseen threat of the Chainfire spell and the chimes, and how they were actively corrupting the very foundation of all magic.
Right, the invisible war.
Exactly. Second, we'll look at Jagang's physical and psychological domination, the sheer scale of his siege ramp against the People's Palace, and the brutal strategic use of the Order's game, Jala Jin.
The game of life.
The game of life. And finally, we will dissect the true nature of the Boxes of Orden and how Richard Rahl leveraged that final terrifying solution.
So before we even get to the siege, to the armies and the ramp, we have to talk about the silent killer that was already at work, the Chainfire spell. This wasn't a visible army. It was this slow, corrosive erosion of existence itself. So what did the sources tell us about the initial, immediate impact of Chainfire?
Well, the spell was insidious because it was so fundamental. The immediate and probably most famous effect was the total erasure of identity from memory.
Right, like with Kahlan.
Exactly, Kahlan. People forgot she existed entirely. It was as if she had never been born.
Yeah.
But the sources, they all reveal that the true, terrifying danger wasn't the amnesia itself. It was the fact that the Chainfire spell had been thoroughly contaminated.
Contaminated. Okay, contaminated by what exactly? And what did that contamination do to the magical world? It was contaminated by the chimes. Now, these entities, they're essentially anti-magic forces from the underworld. And their taint was buried deep within the Chainfire spell. And this effect, it wasn't passive. The sources confirmed this contamination wasn't static.
It was growing.
It was active, rapidly growing and multiplying upon itself. It was literally burning through the fabric of magic itself, a kind of metaphysical corrosion.
So the magical infrastructure was breaking down, but you're saying the chime's taint embedded in Chainfire was also having a neurological or psychological impact on the living.
Precisely. The damage went way beyond the realm of sorcery. It was actively eroding people's ability to think, to reason, to understand cause and effect. As the spell grew daily, they were losing not only their memories, but their capacity for complex thought.
Which would make them more vulnerable to the Order's simplistic fanaticism.
Exactly. The world was subtly, slowly turning mad.
And how did this metaphysical collapse? How did it manifest physically, especially in what should have been the most secure location in the world, the Keep?
It manifested in bizarre and, frankly, utterly terrifying ways. The Keep, which was Richard's palace in the Darren Heartland, it was designed with ancient, sophisticated defenses. Defenses designed to protect against all forms of magic. Yet, because the chime's taint corrupting the Chainfire spell was essentially poisoning all additive magic, the stone walls of the Keep began to weep.
Weep what?
Human blood.
No.
Yeah, literally human blood was oozing out of the stone walls in different random places with absolutely no discernible pattern. This wasn't some localized curse. It was physical proof that the foundation of magic protecting the entire structure was collapsing from the inside out.
That's a profound violation of natural law. A structure designed to repel all magic was so corrupted that it was bleeding. And we saw the practical failure of this collapse when the witch woman, 6, just walked right in.
She was able to just dance right in. And the sources really emphasized the gravity of this. The alarms didn't sound. The shields didn't engage. The ancient safeguards, built over centuries to protect invaluable magical artifacts and knowledge, they failed completely.
So why? Why did they fail?
The contamination. It had corrupted the magical verification systems of the keep itself, preventing those essential alarms and shields from functioning properly. Nicci even described the hallways as feeling strangely silent after the breach, which is just a chilling absence of the magical defenses you'd expect to feel.
This necessitates a truly desperate measure.
Absolutely.
I mean, if the home of the resistance is bleeding and defenseless, they can't stay. What was the first wizard, Zedd, forced to do?
Zedd realized they couldn't risk the valuable magical items, the libraries, falling to Jagang's forces if the contamination fully consumed the keep's defenses. So his solution was an act of metaphysical sacrifice. He had to activate an emergency lockdown procedure using an ancient artifact he found in storage. A bone box.
Wait, hold on. Zedd is the first wizard, one of the most powerful people alive. Why was this ancient artifact just sitting in storage, and what was its actual purpose?
That's an excellent point, and the sources suggest it really speaks to the immense historical oversight of magic. The bone box was an artifact about the size of a box of Orden, covered in these protective carved symbols. It represented a measure of absolute last resort. A light spell so dangerous and complex that, as far as Zedd could determine, it had never been activated before. Its purpose was existential defense.
And the consequence of activating this light spell, I mean, we heard it would deal harshly with anyone inside. Can we clarify the specificity of that threat?
We have to be specific because the danger was existential. The information Zedd reviewed suggested that this emergency lockdown would create an impregnable barrier. Nothing could get in. However, the energy required and the nature of the spell were so violent that they had to assume it would essentially eliminate, or perhaps even molecularly dissolve anyone remaining inside when it was activated.
So a total wipe.
A clean slate procedure, yeah. All to deny gang access to the secrets of the keep.
So Zedd was willing to sacrifice the physical structure and potentially anyone still inside just to prevent the enemy from gaining magical supremacy. What was the immediate escape plan to execute this final counter strategy?
The goal was to regroup far away and execute the true counter-strategy using Orden. And the logistics of that escape depended entirely on Nicci, who wields subtractive magic, a very rare form of magic that draws power rather than channeling it. And she also possessed the knowledge to use the Slipha.
The Slipha, that's the magical transport, right?
Yes. Nicci would use the Slipha to travel to Tamarang, but via the People's Palace. Once she was through, Zedd would immediately activate the Bone Box spell. And critically, the protective spell's energy would draw branches of its power to harden the entry points, including the Slipha itself.
Sealing it off.
Sealing it off, preventing Jagang's forces or anyone else from sneaking back in after the lockdown. It was a desperate race against time.
It truly paints a picture of desperation. They were sacrificing their safety, their home, potentially their lives, just to prevent a magical asset transfer to Jagang. It shows the scale of the threat Richard was confronting, often unknowingly, even before his own magical gift was restored.
And this feeds directly into the ultimate objective, Richard needed to unleash Orden, to purge the world, not just of the Chainfire event, but of the extensive contamination left by the chimes. Nicci initially questioned Zedd on this. She argued Orden was only designed to counter Chainfire, but Zedd insisted. He insisted that Richard had already proven the contamination was so extensive because of its effect on the keep that only Orden had the sheer power to cleanse the world of life completely.
So while Zedd is facing this total collapse of magic, Richard Rahl, the only real hope for the world, is forced into a strategy that relied purely on psychological warfare. Chained up in the middle of Jagang's vast, disgusting Imperial Order encampment, operating under the highly specific alias Reuben.
The sources spend a significant amount of time detailing the sensory experience of this encampment, and for good reason. It was designed to instill awe and fear. It's described as a great churning beast that ceaselessly just swallowed up land and resources. The overwhelming sensory detail was the smell, a ubiquitous vile stink of soot, fetid sweat, rancid refuse, latrines, manure, all mingling into a smell that was forever linked in the memory of the soldiers to misery and death.
The scale is almost impossible to imagine. Millions of soldiers waiting for the signal for murder, rape, and plunder. How did Jagang maintain order and focus among such a massive, restless, and inherently violent force?
He kept them busy. Always, perpetually busy. The grand project was the key psychological anchor, the construction of an enormous, well-compacted and reinforced ramp designed to assault the People's Palace. This wasn't just manual labor. You had intelligent men supervising the brutish laborers, keeping millions of soldiers busy in shifts every hour of the day and night.
So it's a visible symbol of their purpose.
It was a visible, singular, physical sacrifice to the cause of the order, a way to enforce faith, through collective effort, while they waited to fulfill their religious destiny of conquest.
That's just textbook authoritarian control, isn't it? Distracting them from their daily misery by focusing their energy on a colossal, unifying physical goal. But beyond the ramp, they had their own brutal form of entertainment, which Richard was forced to participate in. Jala de Jin, the game of life.
This game was the cultural heart of the Imperial Order army. It really was. Soldiers played it almost from childhood. It was viewed not merely as sport, but as a matter of life and death, nearly equal in importance to the cause of the Order itself. It was a public performance of the brutality they were expected to unleash on the world.
And the rules, they actively encouraged maximum savagery, correct?
Oh, absolutely. The army games were notoriously savage. The violence was celebrated, broken limbs, fractured skulls, death. These were frequent results. The crowd was essential to the atmosphere. They believed that if there wasn't enough blood, the teens weren't trying hard enough. And we have that chilling detail that Jagang demonstrated the absolute value he placed on fanaticism, once ordered an entire team executed simply because he felt they hadn't fought with sufficient brutality.
So Richard Rahl, the man known as the Seeker, whose whole philosophy centers on preserving life, finds himself forced to play this death match, and he's the point man for Commander Karg's team. What was his single overriding motivation for risking his life in this game?
His motivation was utterly singular and personal. He needed to win the ultimate prize offered, which was his choice of a woman.
Kahlan.
That woman was Kahlan, his wife, whom he wanted and needed to rescue from Jagang's direct captivity. He needed her more than life itself. He had to use the game as a highly visible Trojan horse operation.
And to achieve that visibility, Richard didn't just play. He leveraged his inherent non-magical talents to create an aesthetic of terror on the field, the red battle paint.
That's such a fascinating detail. Richard insisted on painting his team's faces with truly frightening original designs. These designs were composed of specific, complex elements derived from the Dance with Death, specifically symbolizing centering strength. He couldn't trust the men to choose their own designs because too much was at stake regarding perception and, intimidation.
What's the deeper significance of those Dance with Death symbols? I mean, it sounds like a paradox.
It is. For a war wizard like Richard, the Dance with Death is fundamentally devoted to life, specifically to preserving it by avoiding death. Richard, even without the sword of truth at that moment, still grasped the totality of this meaning. So the designs he drew were a natural extension of his fighting style, and even his carving ability, all of which shared basic parts, movement, and flow.
And he needed them to be unrecognized.
Yes, his goal was not just pure intimidation, but to create designs that were original enough that none of the sisters, who might recognize magical symbols or warding, would know their direct meaning. He was planting fear and ensuring his team would eventually face the Emperor's famously unbeatable personal team, which would get him close to Jagang.
So he's using his expertise in preserving life to create the most aggressive, threatening public image possible. And his tactics on the field matched this paradox.
They were terrifyingly effective. Richard's team relied on sheer aggression. They'd charge right up the middle in a tightly packed wedge formation, just mowing down any dispersed opposing players in their path. We see him in action, dodging, leaping, catching the leather-covered ball, and driving opponents' faces into the mud. But crucially, the sources emphasize that Richard was deliberately avoiding breaking their necks, even when he could have easily done so with his superior skill and strength.
So he was adhering to the Dance with Death even while participating in a death match.
Exactly. He used their own violence against them, forcing them to underestimate him, while simultaneously driving his team toward the visibility required for his ultimate goal. This strategic use of a seemingly trivial yet culturally vital game is perhaps one of the most genius aspects of his plan to infiltrate and disrupt the enemy command structure. So while Richard was busy winning this game, the Imperial Order wasn't placing all their bets on that massive ramp. That was the public face of the siege. The sources reveal they had a quiet, faster contingency plan to breach the People's Palace, focusing on a hidden vulnerability rather than just brute force.
And this vulnerability was accidentally revealed during the ramp construction itself, wasn't it?
It was the sheer volume of excavation required for the ramp. It led the crew to uncover an ancient barrel-vaulted ceiling. This indicated a buried structure or tunnel system located right near the plateau, an entry point under the very foundation and defenses of the palace.
That sounds like the perfect shortcut for Jagang, allowing him to bypass the heavy outer defenses. How did the Order plan to exploit this catacomb discovery?
Well, recognizing its immense value, the Sisters of the Dark and their foremen immediately began gathering elite forces in these catacombs, repairing any damage to the old tunnels. The paramount importance was secrecy. Their plan was brilliant in its deception.
What was it?
They disguised the entrance with a thin veneer of marble to deceive the People's Palace defenders. They anticipated a surprise assault, believing the defenders would be laser-focused on the colossal ramp, and thus caught completely unaware when the enemy sprang from beneath their feet.
So Jagang had a highly visible physical threat, a hidden metaphysical threat with Chainfire, and now a hidden physical entry point. Richard had to act quickly, capitalizing on the chaos he himself had generated during that Jala riot.
The riot was the key. Triggered by the game's volatility and the crowd's long-simmering malcontent, it provided the necessary cover. Richard, still chained and wounded from his recent capture, used the darkness and chaos. He was aided by General Myford, who had infiltrated the camp, and Bruce, a surprisingly sympathetic Order soldier, as well as Eddie, the witchwoman.
They managed to escape in a wagon and enter the catacombs themselves. So what was the goal once they were inside the tunnel system?
The urgent mission was to find the breach and warn the palace before the disguised entry could be fully exploited. However, once inside, they realized they were too late. Jagang's seasoned warriors were already pouring through the newly breached wall. The Order's surprise attack was in full swing.
And this immediately erupted into a desperate, brutal fight with Richard at the center, despite his physical state.
Richard, chained and exhausted, fought furiously and without mercy. He was soon joined by those who had been searching for him. The formidable Mordsith.
Right. For our listener who might not be familiar with them, who are the Mordsith and what is their terrifying weapon?
Mordsith Cara, Berdine, and Nida are fierce warrior women who were captured, broken, and trained by the Doharnan Empire to be personal guards. Their signature weapon is the Aegil.
Which looks harmless.
It looks like a simple stick, but it's charged with agonizing magic designed to inflict pure pain, so extreme it instantly kills if applied improperly. When the Mordsith joined the fight, they were devastatingly effective, using their Aegil to kill instantly and efficiently, forcing the Order soldiers, even the seasoned ones, to back away from them in terror.
But the scale of the Order's forces pouring in was overwhelming. The fight was won not by steel and Aegil alone, but by a massive, overwhelming force of magic wizard's fire.
It was the prophet Nathan Rahl who saved the day. General Myford had yelled at Nathan, who had been focused on his magical research, to understand the immediate threat. And Nathan responded by unleashing a weapon of mass magical destruction. Wizard's fire.
Describe that weapon in detail. It sounds horrifying, but necessary.
It was horrific. Nathan conjured tumbling spheres of bubbling, boiling liquid light, a pure, white-hot inferno that was sentient and obeyed his command. He cast these spheres down the dark, narrow corridor. They expanded rapidly and just skipped across the heads of the masses of Imperial Order troops,
Wow.
spilling molten light and flame down upon them. The sources describe the shrieks of agony from men burning alive as being so intense they drowned out the clash of steel entirely. It was a relentless purge, which Richard observed with grim certainty, knowing the panicking men at the back of the tunnel would be racing back to the main encampment, purging the tunnel system of the surprise attack force.
That's an immense act of violence necessary for survival. But in the immediate aftermath, Nicci delivered devastating personal news to Nathan amidst the carnage.
She did. She informed him that Prelate Anne, the leader of the Sisters of the Light and a key ally, had been killed. Richard himself hadn't known this either. The strong implication for the sources is that Anne may have been killed while attempting to secure the keep. Possibly during or shortly before, Six managed to violate its defenses. Nathan was understandably crushed. He had only just begun to reconcile with Anne after years of separation and conflict. The emotional toll of this war was just immense, even for the most powerful, gifted individuals.
Okay, here is where the personal stakes of Richard and Kahlan intersect with the deepest, most complex magical theory of the entire war: the sterile field. Let's start with Kahlan's horrific situation under Jagang, who could weaponize her fear.
Kahlan was held captive and constantly subjected to abuse and searing shocks from the Radahan collar. For those unfamiliar, the Radahan is a magical collar designed to slowly crush the life and power out of gifted people, inducing extreme pain and obedience. And Jagang, as a dreamwalker, he delighted in psychological torment, promising her that when her memory finally returned, her life would become one of endless future torment as she remembered all the evils he forced her to commit.
We mentioned Jagang was a dreamwalker. This means he could wander the minds of the Sisters of the Dark and was always privy to their thoughts and plans. How did Kahlan resist such a powerful mental assault?
Her main defense was sheer, forced indifference. She maintained a blank look, devoid of emotion, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her fear. And the source confirms that Jorgang's power was extensive, but it wasn't limitless. For instance, he was occasionally blocked, notably when Sister Yalisha's frantic warning managed to get through to Richard without his full comprehension. Kahlan's strategy was psychological defiance. She was proud to have earned the contempt of such a vile man, knowing whatever she had done in her past must have placed her firmly in opposition to the Order's will.
She knew who she was even if she couldn't remember.
Exactly. She knew she was a dangerous woman, and she was counting steps and learning everything she could about her guards, planning to kill the smartest one first.
Now let's pivot to the magical solution designed to save her, Orden. Nicci, having studied the Book of Life, explained the core requirement needed to activate its restorative magic against Chainfire.
The fundamental requirement was the sterile field. Orden is not a simple spell. It's a highly complex constructed magical safeguard, created specifically as the world's only salvation against the Chainfire event. For it to repair the damage, starting from the point of origin, which was Kahlan, the foundational link needed to be a blank slate, perfectly uncorrupted.
And Kahlan, the crucial connection point for Orden, was supposed to be that blank slate. But why is emotional foreknowledge the contaminant? We're dealing with incredibly sophisticated constructed magic. Why would the state of her heart break the entire process?
This is the deepest secret of Ordenic theory. The wizards who created Orden, they were terrified that foreknowledge of a certain emotional nature, specifically her overwhelming love for Richard, would contaminate the restorative magic. Kahlan isn't just a focus point, she's the foundational emotional lens through which the spell seeks to define truth and reality.
So if she learned the truth of her love for Richard before the correct Box of Orden was opened, the love, which is the most powerful force in the world of life, would be subconsciously fighting the memory erasure.
Exactly. The magical field wouldn't be blank. It would be a messy war zone of recovered emotion battling erased fact. It wouldn't be sterile. The conflict of that powerful, partially returned emotional identity would create a feedback loop, forever trapping her individual memories within the tangle of the Chainfire spell, even as the rest of the world healed.
And what would be the consequence of that contamination?
Orden would fail to restore her memories completely, meaning she would be permanently lost in the tangle of the spell. Even if everyone else's memory was restored, Kahlan would forever be without her past, essentially existing only from the point the Chainfire spell took her identity. She'd become a different, empty shell in the body of the woman Richard loved.
That explains the agonizing paradox of Richard's evasiveness toward Kahlan when they were reunited. He desperately wanted to confess his love, but that single act of emotional truth would guarantee she could never truly be herself again. It was an act of love to deny his love.
Precisely. Richard kept his distance, knowing the stakes, which led Kahlan to believe, wrongly, that Nicci was the woman Richard loved due to his cryptic answers and Nicci's constant presence. Nicci, however, understood the full horror of the situation, believing Richard must open the correct box, even if it means that it will kill Kahlan, because the alternative was the end of the world for everyone.
And Zedd confirmed this wasn't just a theory. He cited Richard's history with Confessor magic as irrefutable proof of the contamination principle.
Zedd had a startling, crucial realization. He recalled how Richard had survived the power of Confessor magic, a power that requires the Confessor to choose a mate she doesn't care about. Specifically because if the man had foreknowledge of the solution to her power, or knew a solution existed, her magic would have taken him.
He had to be totally unaware.
Totally unaware for the magic to work properly, or in this context, for the protection to work. Richard himself had already validated the central question of Ordenic theory regarding contamination and emotional foreknowledge.
The fate of the world literally rested on Richard lying to the woman he loved about the deepest truth of his heart. Let's shift our attention now to Nicci, the woman who was willing to play this terrible game and whose convictions had completely crumbled.
Nicci was notorious, known as Death's mistress, a former slave queen devoted to the Order, ruthlessly effective in enforcing their will, a conviction she based on the deeply contradictory idea of benevolence enforced through brutality. Richard's consistent, unwavering kindness and forgiveness toward her, despite her having kidnapped him and nearly ruining his life, completely dismantled her core beliefs.
What realization did she come to about her own motives?
She realized her prior convictions were contradictory and, well, hollow. Crucially, she realized she was driven not by greed like the other Sisters of the Dark, but by guilt. Guilt for the atrocities she committed in the name of the Order. Richard's pure approach to life and justice showed her the error of her ways.
And Prelate Anne tried to use this transformation for her own ends, challenging Nicci to replace Kahlan entirely.
and did. She challenged Nicci to step into the role Richard needed, and argued that Richard needed a partner who could wield subtractive magic, which, as the Mother Confessor, Kahlan could not do. She was suggesting Kahlan was essentially gone, just an empty shell, and wanted Nicci to manipulate Richard, to use his dependency on her to guide his choices toward a path of their making.
But Nicci refused to fall back into manipulation.
She refused absolutely. Nicci argued that Richard was a man ruled by reason and principle, not by passion, and she would not repeat her past mistake of trying to force him to love her or manipulate him. She asserted she would act as a true friend, a partner who would teach and guide him without taking advantage of his situation or his pain. And this act of genuine friendship earned Anne's respect, confirming that Nicci was a woman of true character, driven by remorse rather than the malice that defined the true Sisters of the Dark. Nicci committed to giving Richard whatever he needed, even if it meant remaining on a lonely path without his returned love, just to ensure the world was saved.
So the narrative takes this massive turn when Richard's long-suppressed magical ability, his additive magic, bursts back to life. After being cut off for so long, what was the catalyst that triggered the return of his gift?
It was pure, overwhelming, seething rage. Specifically, his rage against those who existed solely to hate and hurt others through twisted beliefs, the Imperial Order. As this blinding rage flowed through him, connecting with his birthright, he felt a sudden, violent, wrenching jolt within, an inner storm that led to a staggering awakening, this instantaneous, violent return of his power, which was additive magic, the power of creation and life. It was so intense it caused monumental physical pain.
But in that instant of pain, he achieved a profound act of salvation for his friend.
Yes. In that same moment, they heard a sharp, metallic pop. Richard's restored power was so profound that the immense magical force instantly burst apart the Radahan collar that had been slowly crushing the life out of Nicci. This was Richard's first act of recovered magic, saving Nicci from the torture that was breaking his heart.
Now gifted again, Richard had to master the Boxes of Orden quickly. The strategic situation was worsening, confirmed by General Meffert's terrible news about a new, powerful enemy ally in the old world.
Meffert reported a catastrophic development. A giant red dragon with wings, ridden by the witch woman Six, was actively hunting Daern troops. This confirmed Jagang had gained a new, highly visible and terrifying ally, and was likely very close to acquiring the third and final Box of Orden, which would grant him ultimate power.
The threat was now imminent. Richard had to recognize the urgency, and Lucci's magical theory about the palace provided the crucial breakthrough. The Garden of Life was not ornamental.
Nicci realized that the Garden of Life, the inner sanctum of the People's Palace, was not simply a symbolic or beautiful space. It was an elaborate, constructed chamber, built specifically to provide the exact, controlled conditions necessary to open one of the Boxes of Orden. It required specific lighting, precise angles, alignments based on star charts. This led to Richard's terrifying realization. Jagang wasn't worried about opening the boxes before because he first needed to take the People's Palace itself to complete his goal. The palace was, and always had been, the key to unlocking Orden's power.
To counter this, Richard needed knowledge fast. That led him, Kahlan, and Zedd to Tamarang to recover the critical book hidden by the first war wizard Baracus.
They journeyed to Tamarang for secrets of a war wizard's power hidden for 3,000 years. And the sources note the beautiful irony. When Richard was cut off from his gift, the book appeared blank to him, proving his magic was tied to the war wizard gift.
But now,
Upon recovering his gift, the text was instantly revealed. But even here, danger lurked, as Six intercepted them.
and it was here that Six's mother, the sorceress Shoda, appeared and revealed the devastating true cost of the chimes of contamination, connecting the magical collapse of Segment 1 to the physical world.
Shoda, known as the Dragon Lady, revealed the grim source of Six's terrifying mount. The chime's contamination was actively killing the red dragons across the world. The dragons, including Richard's ally Scarlet, were lashing out violently because they were dying from the metaphysical taint. Shoda told Richard he might be the only one who could stop the contamination, emphasizing the urgency of reaching the People's Palace immediately.
Richard then has the profound realization that the complex search for the correct incantations was a massive smokescreen, a deflection designed by the ancient wizards.
He realizes the key to Orden was not the complex esoteric spells in the Book of Counted Shadows, the original manuscript of which Jagang now possessed. The book was a masterful ruse.
What was the true key that Baracus and the ancient wizards left disguised?
It was the Sword of Truth.
The sword itself.
The sword itself. Hundreds of ancient wizards, led by Baracus, left the true key disguised right under everyone's noses. The sword was infused with the necessary additive magic created by those same ancient wizards to complete Orden's constructed spell. It wasn't a complex magical formula that was needed. It was the ultimate tool of justice, a conduit Richard, as the true seeker, had to wield.
So the final confrontation was set. Jagang, via a surrogate soldier, delivered his ultimatum, promising to spare the palace and use it as his headquarters if Richard would surrender the palace and Nicci by the new moon. But Richard knew this date was the final moment of decision for the world.
Richard's plan was swift and decisive. He used the Sorcerer's Sand, special sand used for spell forms in the Garden of Life. But his true purpose was not to use Orden for planetary restoration. Instead, he exploited Orden's constructed power to create a gateway through the underworld.
And the man who had tormented Kahlan and Nicci for so long met an astonishingly swift, shocking end, orchestrated by Nicci.
Nicci accompanied Richard, and in a tense, pivotal moment, she calmly snapped the Radahan collar closed around Jagang's massive neck, exerting immediate, complete magical control. She used her power to prevent him from talking, silencing his fanatical ideology forever, and then had him executed.
Just like that.
His corpse was unceremoniously thrown in a mass grave. This eliminated the figurehead, but Richard understood that killing Jagang would not cure the world of zealotry. The Order's beliefs were not driven by one man, but by a shared fundamental flaw.
Richard then confronted the remaining Sisters of the Dark, revealing the final safeguard built into Orden, a safeguard against hatred itself.
Richard explained that Orden contained a deadly warning built into its core logic. Those who have come here to hate should leave now, for in their hatred they only betray themselves. He clarified to Sister Elisha that using Orden for hate would trigger a deadly, destructive reaction against the user.
But the sisters argued they didn't hate. They were merely eliminating Hebans and enforcing benevolence. What was Richard's ultimate, defining moral counterpoint?
Richard countered that they hated those they envied. They hated that others were happy, free, and in control of their own lives. He asserted that his action, eliminating those who harm innocent people, was not done out of hate, but out of love and respect for innocent life. His decision was a product of reasoned justice, which he declared was the celebration of civilization, not the exercise of personal hatred.
And with that profound moral foundation, the ultimate fulfillment of the prophecy was achieved.
Richard, acting as the seeker and the war wizard, thrust the sword of truth, the final key, into the Box of Orden. The ensuing explosion of blinding light and roaring, burning sand opened the gateway through the underworld and sealed the Sisters of the Dark and the entire Imperial Order realm in a new, distant world, fulfilling the prophecy of the Great Void, not as destruction, but as necessary permanent separation.
The resolution was so profound, achieving a scale of victory that redefined the stability of two worlds forever. Let's start with the fate of the Imperial Order, the banished world. What was the impact of being sealed off from the world of life?
The entire realm of the Imperial Order was sealed off, cut off completely from the underworld and all other realms, permanently ending their threat. And crucially, Richard sent the Chainfire spell with them.
He sent it with them. Why?
This was intended to erase the memory of their old world, their fanaticism, and their devotion to the Order.
So not only did they lose their physical connection to the old world, but they also lost the promised metaphysical payoff for their zealotry.
Exactly. Because their world was now an island cut off from the underworld, their existence became finite. The sources are very clear. Their souls would cease to exist upon physical death. This forced, singular existence gave them the only chance they might ever have to value their life as the only one they possess, potentially forcing them to realize that fanaticism and waste were the ultimate losses.
Yeah.
It was complex punishment that prioritized life over ideology.
And what about the world Richard saved? How did the Daeran world react to the removal of this source of existential darkness?
The Daeran world experienced an immediate and profound rebirth of spirit. With the source of fanatical hatred, persecution, and constant warfare removed, the restraints on human potential just vanished. Labor-saving innovations flourished, and opportunities for individuals to create, prosper, and pursue happiness were no longer shackled by the fear of tyranny. The world was literally described as being in flower.
And the personal fulfillment Richard sought finally arrived. The source confirms he fulfilled his promise to Kahlan, confessing his love for her now that the contamination threat was gone.
It was the necessary culmination of their agonizing journey. They were finally together, Richard telling her, "I love you," and calling her the most beautiful woman here. This followed a complex, torturous period where Kahlan, due to her amnesia and Richard's necessary silence to protect the sterile field, had believed he loved Nicci. The emotional complexity and trust Richard demanded were finally realized in the return of her memory and the beginning of their life together, a life they fought so hard to reclaim.
We have to acknowledge the incredible contributions of non-traditional magic in this fight. People who weren't necessarily wizards or sorceresses, but played these vital roles.
Absolutely. The first is Rachel. Richard's mother, in the form of a spirit, gave Rachel, a young woman who had previously been a servant, a piece of chalk, telling her she would instinctively know what to do. Rachel had assisted Six and Violet in drawing spell forms. She realized that simply erasing a spell component would only weaken the hold. The spell might still reassert itself. Instead, she used the chalk to alter the spell form by adding a variance line.
That's fascinating. A child's intuition and slight alteration trumped sophisticated dark magic.
It completely undid the witch woman's complex spell. A single act of genius, proving that intent and slight alteration are sometimes more powerful than brute force magic.
And who is the second key player operating outside the traditional spheres of power?
Jillian, the priestess of the bones and Richard's servant. Richard, drawing on ancestral war wizard knowledge, intended to reverse the traditional use of dream casting. Instead of casting dreams, he intended to cast nightmares over the Order's camp, using a creature called Loki. Jillian focused her mind, channeling these nightmares, which, Nicci explained, would drop from Loki's midnight black wings like an icy rain over the camp, confirming the critical role of non-traditional magic in demoralizing the enemy right up to the final moment.
And finally, Richard's sister, Jensen. She, as one of the pristinely ungifted, meaning she had no magic whatsoever, was given a choice that defined her new path.
Richard ensured that Jensen, her husband Tom, who took the name Rahl, and others who desired a life free from the tyranny of magic were sent to the banished world, which Richard named Bandikar. And crucially, Chainfire's subtractive magic continued to spread their pristinely ungifted trait throughout that new world.
So magic would fade there.
This minimized the role of magic, fulfilled Jensen's desired path, and ensured that the new civilization would focus on reason and choice, not the whims of the gifted.
The entire journey culminates in Richard's philosophy, the moral center of the conflict, encapsulated beautifully in his marriage ceremony speech for Cara and Benjamin.
It was the ultimate thematic conclusion of the entire conflict, he declared. Life is the gift each of us has been given. Each life is our own and no one else's. It is precious beyond all counting. It is the greatest value we can have. Cherish it for what it truly is. This belief, the supreme singular value of individual life, was the counterpoint to the Order's dogma of self-sacrifice for an unearned afterlife. #outro.
What a profound and complex deep dive into the source material. We've explored the mechanics of magical collapse, psychological warfare, and the incredible ethical tightropes Richard had to walk. The true insights here are just astounding.
I agree. The first major revelation, that Richard had unknowingly proved the entire core theory of Ordenic magic, was sound via his initial relationship with Confessor Power. That's a brilliant piece of magical writing. And that emotional foreknowledge could contaminate a sterile field became the single most important plot mechanic, justifying Richard's agonizing silence.
And of course, the reveal that the complex, millennia-old spells in the Book of Counted Shadows were a massive decoy, a trick, designed to send everyone off track, protecting the real key, which was the Sword of Truth itself, right under everyone's noses. The key was the simple, pure tool of justice, not some complicated magical formula.
And finally, the ultimate inversion of the existential threat. Orden, designed to be dangerously powerful and acting as a conduit through the underworld for planetary restoration, was leveraged instead as a mechanism for permanent political and metaphysical separation, a gateway to banish the entire threat, thus saving the world by subtraction rather than restoration.
So what does this all mean for the bigger picture?
Well, Richard faced an enemy with overwhelming military force, memory-erasing spells, and the collapse of reality itself. Yet his ultimate victory rested on three fundamental non-magical elements: reason, choice, and love. He used reason to decipher the true nature of Orden. He valued choice in freeing Nicci and Jensen, and he deployed justice out of love for the innocent, which ensured Orden didn't trigger its hate-based self-destruct mechanism. These were the true powers that overcame the most complex magical constructs.
It's a reminder that even when you're confronting the unbelievable, the complete corrosion of reality, the most critical variables are always deeply human principles.
Indeed. Which leaves us with a provocative final thought, based on the profound conclusion of this conflict. Richard, despite his success and his focus on justice, permanently sealed off an entire world and sentenced millions of people to a finite existence, infected with memory loss and severed from magic. If the Imperial Order and its people were permanently sent to a world where their only chance at survival depends on rejecting their old ways, did Richard truly give them a chance at a new civilization based on free will, or did he merely sentence them to a slow, dark end where their survival depends on forgetting who they were? That choice, made out of love for one world, has profound and complex consequences for the other.
A truly complex act of reasoned justice to consider. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you feel thoroughly informed.